Hello everybody, Wald here. So welcome to the second part of this tutorial series, and I'm really glad that you've made it so far. But in this episode we're going to add our spaceship. We're also going to take a look at some input functions that PHASER has, which we're going to use to move our spaceship. I've also realized that in the last episode the theme was too dark, so I've changed it in this episode and hopefully it's easier to see. In the description I've left a link to the assets needed for this episode. I've created just a basic player sprite that you can use, so go ahead and just put that in your assets folder that we have in the project. But yeah, this should be a really fun episode, so let's get into it. Alright, so the first thing we actually want to do is load the image of our player. And the way we can do that is go down in our preload function, and in here all we have to do, just like in PHASER 2, you do this.load.image, and then a key, we'll have player, and then a path, it's in our assets folder, and we'll do player.png. Alright, so now we need a function which basically can create our player object. So let's just go down below our update function and let's go ahead and create a function called makePlayer. And once we have made that function, we can go ahead and create a player variable. And this is just going to be an image of the player. So we'll do this.add.image, and then we'll have some kind of position we need to take in the position. I'm going to pass it through the parameter, an X and a Y. I'm going to place our player at that position. And then we also need our key, which is player, as we wrote it up here in the preload function. Alright, so let's go back in our makePlayer function, and the cool thing about PHASER 3 is that you can chain these functions. So here I can do setOrigin. So this is how origin points work. So you can think of the origin as some kind of point on a texture. So let's say this was our texture, this rectangle, and we have a point here that is the origin point. That would be 0, 0, and at the bottom right it would be 1, 1. So now let's say I set this texture's position to 500, 500, and the origin point is at 0, 0. So here is 500, 500, and our texture would look something like this if our origin point was at 0, because we have our origin point here. Now let's say our origin point was at 1, 1. So this is position 500, 500. Our texture would look like this. It will be at the bottom right. Okay, so now let's say the origin point is in the middle. So 0.5 and 0.5. And that would look something like this. Let's say, okay, so this is 500, 500. Our texture would look like this, so right in the middle. So you can think of origin points just as something that the texture bases its position on. Origin points can also influence other things, such as, let's say we did a camera zoom. So let's say we had our texture over here. Let me do a better line. Let's say we had our texture over here, and we had an origin point here at 1, 1. And now let's say we wanted to zoom in the camera, it would zoom in this point. So this would be the view of the camera if we were to zoom in on the texture. I'm trying to record a video. Okay, that was annoying. So yeah, let's go ahead and actually set this origin point. So I want it to be in the middle of the sprite, but I also want it to be at the bottom of the sprite. So it will be in the center, but it will be at the bottom. So we'll set it to 0.5 on the x-axis. So that will be in the middle, and 1 on the y-axis, so that would be at the bottom. So now we need to return this player sprite so that we can set it above in our create function. So just do return player. Now let's actually go ahead and make our player. So I'm going to go here just below the game variable. I'll say var player, and now create function, which is going to be setting that player variable to make player. So now if we actually go into the game, you can see that we have an error. It says that image is not defined. It's actually referring to this makePlayer function over here. And what we need in order to fix that, we need to pass this function, this makePlayer function, through our config file, because we are actually trying to reference the scene object we need to reference the scene object, but it can't get these subsystems. It doesn't know what this is, so we can't access the image subsystem. So the way to include a function, you just go up in your config and you make an extra function. You just say extend, and then we can set make player to make player. So all this does is it basically sends the game context, the scene context, to this function, so that this is the scene instead of the window. And now to get our player on the screen, we need to also fix this. To fix the context, we need to say this.makePlayerNow to reference to this function. And we of course also need to set the position. For now I'm just going to set it to 100 and 100 just to see whether the player shows up. So let's go into the game, refresh, and there's our little guy. Cool, so now we have that. So let's actually position the player correctly. On the X we want him in the middle, and the way to get the middle of the screen in PHASER 3 is you have to do this.sys for system .canvas .width, and we want to divide that by 2 so that the player is in the middle. And for the Y we want the actual height of the screen. So the canvas, I also spelled that wrong, canvas, of course. Okay, so we'll get the height, and since we've set the origin point at the bottom, this will actually show at the top here. So yes, that's correct. Cool, so now let's get some input. I want to be able to move the player on the screen. So first of all, we need some variables which will hold the keys that we want to use. And PHASER has some cool functions for that. So let's just make 2 variables, one for the left key and one for the right key. So left key and var right key. And down in our create function, we're going to just set those. Going to say left key is equals to this.input.keyboard.add key. The parameters it takes is the PHASER key codes. So we'll just do PHASER.input.keyboard.keycodes.left. So that's the left arrow key. And for the right arrow key, we can just copy paste that and change the name. So right key, and we change that to right. Okay, so now we have these keys, but we're not really doing anything with them. So what we need to do is down in our update function. Remember, the update function runs every frame, so we'll do that to check whether the keys are down. So the way we do that is just say if for let's say the right key is down, that's a boolean value, just like in PHASER 2. Then let's move the player. So we'll set player.x to some kind of constant. We're going to say 1 for now. Actually, let's set it to 5. Now I'm going to do the same for the left key. So just go down here. Going to add an else statement. So if the left key is being pressed or is down, we want to take away the player speed, so that way it goes to the left. So now in the game, if we press the left or the right arrow, you can see that we are moving to the right or the left. But there is an issue with this. We can actually go off screen, which is something we don't want. We want to keep the player on the screen. So to do that, we need to check if the player's X is smaller than the game's width. So we'll do this.system, so sys.canvas.width. And that would work, but we have set the player's origin to the middle, so the player would be halfway outside, and we want to actually take the origin point into account when we are setting the bounds for the player. So the way we can do that is simply take away the player's width times the origin. So we can do that. We'll do minus player.displayWidth. That returns the player the width of the player, and we'll just times the player's origin. So player.origin x. And we'll do the same for the right, except we are going to check if the player is on the right side. So if the player's x is bigger than 0, and we'll also do the origin x stuff. So we'll do player.displayWidth times player.origin x. So now let's go into the game, and as you can see, if we go to the left we can't go through, and if we go to the right we can also not go through. And actually there's one thing I want to change, is I want to be able to change the player speed more easily. So the way we can do that, we can stick an empty object on the player variable, and that's really cool about PHASER, that you can they have an empty data object that you can basically attach any properties you want to it. So we're just going to create one right now. So player dot, I'm going to name it props for properties. You can name it whatever you want, and I'm going to set it to an object. And now we can do cool stuff such as player.props.speed, and we'll set it to 5. And now we can go back in our update function, and we can do player.props.speed. So there we go, player.props.speed. So now when we go into the game, the player moves, and if I want to change the speed, let's double it. And now in the game you can see that we are moving twice as fast. I'm not going to go over shooting in this episode because that's a separate episode that I want to do when we already have the enemies and everything set up, and we can get onto the collision. So yeah, that's been it for this episode. If you have enjoyed it and want to see more episodes, and if you're interested in more general game development videos, please go ahead and subscribe. I'll try to upload a new episode every 2 days, and yeah, this should be fun, so goodbye.